Okay, well, welcome one, welcome all. I understand you're having a particularly warm and sunny weather there in winter there in England so far. So I won't belabor the fact that I'm sitting here in Tucson, Arizona at the moment, and while it's probably about 15, 16 degrees today, it is nice and sunny outside. So you can just envision that. Any rate, I'm sure everybody's heard about this place by now. I refer to it affectionately as our muddy little hole in the ground that sucked all the money out of our pockets for close to 20 years. But hey, you got to do something for fun. But Rogerley, of course, is in Weardale, which is part of the North Pennines ore field, which, of course, has been quite famous for mineral specimens for quite a while, particularly fluorite, which occurs in abundance. Um, the Rogerley mine itself is located in the eastern margin of the central fluorite producing region in the area and is, of course, proximal to a lot of other mines that you've probably heard of, including Camberkeels, Heights, Blackdean, Greenlaws, Fraser's Push, Boltzburn, on and on and on and on. Next slide, please. Okay, welcome to Weardale. For you, those of you who may not have had the pleasure of traveling to this back of beyond portion of northern England, it is truly rural, and now with the collapse of local mining for the most part, there are probably more sheep than people up there because it's a very rural agricultural area. Nonetheless, on a nice day, it's very scenic, very beautiful, and just a nice place to hang out and enjoy it all. But looking at this photograph, I think, God, number of days we had like that were probably just a handful. But that's what a camera's for. It makes you remember the good stuff. Next one. All right. Overview of where the North Pennines ore field fits into the overall scheme of things in Great Britain. We are in the northeast, that nice big blue blob there. It's to the west of the West Cumbrian iron ore fields where we got all the calcites and barites and things like that, and Caldbeck Fells, and of course, well north of Cornwall in the southwest, which is the other probably world famous mining region in the country. The North Pennines ore field is divided into what they call two geological blocks. To the north is the Alston block, which is probably the most famous and most productive in terms of lead fluorspar and related mineral specimens. And to the south in North Yorkshire, you have the Ascarig block, which, while not as heavily mineralized and productive in mineral specimens, has also been worked for lead, ores of barium, and I think in a few isolated instances, fluorspar as well over the last several hundred years. Next. All right, a map of the Weardale region. Um, Topographically, what we have here is Weardale proper, which is the valley of the River Wear, which extends from the watershed divide towards Ninthead and Alston Moor to the west, and down through villages of Stanhope, Wolsingham, and then out towards the coast at Sunderland, I think it is. Um, Branching off to the north from that is the Rookup Valley, or Rookup Burn as it's known. Burn is a local term for a tributary stream valley. And up that way, you've got, of course, Boltzburn, which is probably one of the most productive mines ever to have been discovered there, at least in terms of mineral specimens, as well as some newer ones like Fraser's Hush, Stottsfield Burn, etc. Next slide. All right, mining history in the North Pennines. It is known that the Romans were active to the south in York, in North Yorkshire area, and it seems hard to imagine that they wouldn't have made their way up into the modern area of County Durham at the time as well, because their presence was known up around Hadrian's Wall and Vindolanda and Housesteads and a lot of other settlements that were there at the time. But there's no actual evidence of Roman mining in the area. Um, the records we have date back to about the 13th century, where the first recorded leases for mining were taken out. And throughout much of its history, lead was the primary product from all of this. Some silver was recovered from the galena, although the levels were generally fairly low. Um, Lead mining reached its peak in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, but by the end of the 19th century, a glut of the product on the world market caused a depression in the value, and many of the mines up in the Weardale region closed virtually overnight. Coincident with that, however, was the fact that modern steelmaking processes, particularly the Bessemer process, was coming online, which used fluorspar as a fluxing agent. Prior to this, fluorspar had been just a waste material in the mining and was dumped. But by about 1890, people were starting to transition some of the mines from lead to fluorspar, particularly the ones that had fairly large deposits of the material. And fluorspar mining in the Dale ran through much of the 20th century. By the time we showed up to take over the Rogerley, I was told by a fellow from one of the last mines there, Grove Rake, that at the time they shut it down in 1999, you could get processed fluorite from China for about a third of the cost that it cost to get it out of the ground in northern England. And the government in the post-Thatcher era wasn't really interested in supporting industries that couldn't swim by themselves, so that was the end of it. Um, Over the years, lesser amounts of iron, zinc, barium minerals, and I mentioned silver have been recovered from some of the mines as well. Stone quarrying, while not mining proper, stone quarrying has been a common activity in the Dale for a good number of years, and they are still operating stone quarries such as Heights to this day in the area. Um, with the cessation of commercial mining, uh, a few, well, what would you call them, fools and their money have been continuing chasing after mineral specimens and operating places like the Rogerley, Green Laws, and the mines that Ian Bruce established at the former cement quarry, the Annabella Lee, not the Annabella Lee, Annabella, Lady Annabella. Um, and of course now the Diana Marie. So mining continues. Next slide, please. Okay, the general stratigraphy, the geology of the area here. The photo, you can see a cross section of an old limestone quarry. This, in fact, was the western portion of the Rogerley quarry before Ian Bruce and company had their way there. But what you can see there is an exposure of a unit called the Great Limestone, which is at the top of the geological sequence here. These are what's called a cyclothermic sequence of sediments, limestones, sandstones, shales, the occasional coal sill, and these represented repeated marine transgressions onto the continental margin at the time in the Carboniferous area, which was some 300 million years ago. Um, the one for our purposes here that's the most important is near the top of the column called the Great Limestone. And that's the single thickest and most competent limestone in the entire sequence there. And it's also the most heavily mineralized. And we'll get more to how that occurs here in a minute. But that's where all of the mineral specimens, these bright, sparkly, colorful things that seem to catch people's attention and suck money out of their bank accounts, come from. Next. Okay, a cross section, a theorized cross section of the North Pennines ore field. And what this shows is a deposit that's known as a classical Mississippi Valley low temperature lead zinc fluorite type deposit. These were driven by a buried heat source. In this case, it's theorized to be the Weardale granite, which is known to exist from boreholes in the area, but is nowhere exposed at surface. This granite intruded lower Paleozoic sediments and metamorphic rocks, and then was subsequently covered over with the Carboniferous veneer of sediments that we saw in the stratigraphic column in the last slide there. Heat drove a convection of brines from the lower rocks upward into the sediments, which had been fractured and sort of prepared for the deposition of these ore deposits from the fluids that were ascending through the granite. Next. Okay, another map view of the Weardale region. And what we see here, the red lines are the identified mineral veins in the area. And these occupied sets of fractures that ran from northwest to southeast, and then cross veins that ran from northwest, southeast, northwest. Get my directions right. Um, these were subsequently mineralized by the fluids, and it's believed that this was a result of regional temperature gradient. But in the center of the zone, you have what's called the fluorite zone, where fluorite is the primary non-metallic ore. And there's a very abrupt transition laterally to a zone where fluorite disappears and barium minerals such as barite, witherite, alstonite, etc., gain prominence. And it's a very, very sharply defined zone. And these minerals, in only a very few instances, such as the Hilton mine down to the southwest, occur in the same deposit together. Next. Okay, the form of the deposits here, as I mentioned, there are vertical veins which have been uh, filled with ore minerals from the ascending fluids, and these were the primary sources of the commercial ores that were extracted in the area. Um, Lateral to those, you have at certain levels in the Great Limestone what are known as metasomatic replacement deposits, or locally known as flats, because they're horizontal. And they occur at specific horizons, and the most important one, the most well developed, is called the high flats horizon, which is about, oh, I don't know, 10, 15 meters below the top of the Great Limestone itself. And so, for the purposes of mines like the Rogerley, this was the level that we worked at. We followed the vein and looked for the occurrence of flats off to the side of it. The map view here was taken from uh, the Allen Heads vein complex, and you can see the vertical veins, and then how the flats will kind of appear and disappear lateral to the veins. And again, that's where the source of most of the important mineral specimens from the region are. Next. Okay, fluorite. There we go. Fluorite in particular. Um, Fluorite crystals from the North Pennines are somewhat unique in the sense that they are almost invariably twinned, penetration twin on the 111 plane. And they also quite often feature what are called vicinal faces, or small growth patterns. And in the case of the photo on the left here, we can see that they emanate from the point where the penetration twin contacts the face of the cube. And so they always tend to radiate away from that point of contact between the two halves of the twin. Next. Another characteristic of North Pennines fluorite is the incredibly strong fluorescence. And it's theorized that this is the result of the presence of an elevated series of rare earth or lanthanide series elements that are known to be present in the fluorite. Um, you can see examples here of what a Rogerley specimen looks like in artificial light, more of a deep emerald green. Under daylight, it takes on that slight bluish fluorescence because of the intense fluorescent nature of it. It'll react just to the ultraviolet present in daylight. And then under long wave ultraviolet light, you can see a very intense blue-white color. And this is characteristic of all fluorite through the area, although the degree tends to vary with the color of the fluorite, the yellow being the least fluorescent and the green and purples being the most. Next. All right, now on to the Rogerley itself. The Rogerley mine was discovered and first, well, initiated by a couple of local mineral collectors in the early 1970s, Lindsay Greenbank and Mick Sutcliffe. And it came to their attention from actually another collector who had been prowling through the quarry and found fluorite on the floor of the quarry, that these deposits occurred. This fellow wasn't brave enough to rope over from the side of the top of the quarry and actually visit the level where the fluorite was coming from, but Mick and Lindsay seemed to be of well, more daring temperament. And the photo in the upper right, you can see, I believe that's Lindsay climbing down a ladder from the top to collect at the high flats horizon, which was a bit below him at that point. Um, After a while, they realized that this wasn't really a productive way to get at the mineral specimens, because pretty soon you excavated all you could beyond reach from a ladder. So they decided to start an underground mine, which was in fact the first and for many years the only uh, commercial mine operated in the UK for the solely for the purposes of recovering mineral specimens. And the photo to the lower left there shows one of the early blasts trying to establish the platform that later became the portal for the Rogerley. Next. As work progressed, they drove initially two different levels. The lower one on the middle flats horizon, which was easier to access, and initially, I'm told, gave them several good pockets of fluorite, but then disappeared very quickly thereafter. So they migrated up to the high flats horizon and started trying to establish a platform that they could then drive a tunnel from and access the vein in the flats as it went back into the hillside to the north. Next. Um, they were fairly successful in what they found there, considering that the two of them lived over in Kendall and commuted over into Weardale on weekends and essentially couldn't make it when the weather was bad going over Hardhope and all of that. But um, a couple of specimens from the time, the specimen from the Greenbank vein, which was the principal north-south vein that the Rogerley mine was established on, and then another one from a cross vein occurrence in the western portion of the Rogerley quarry. They worked this by hand occasionally, but concentrated most of their efforts on what we know today as the Rogerley mine. Um, that cross vein we named the Sutcliffe vein after Mick. The Greenbank vein was named after Lindsay by Sir Kingsley Dunham, who was a very famous and well-known geologist who chronicled the history and geology of the North Pennines ore field before his death passing around 2001, 2002, I believe it was. Um, the Sutcliffe vein has become the site of more recent activities by Ian Bruce and company as the Rogerley mine is uh, needs extensive rehabilitation since the tunnel has gone fairly far back into the hillside by this point, and it was easier just to switch around and attack it from the other side. Next. Okay. As I mentioned, Lindsay and Mick worked the mine through the mid 70s to mid 90s. Um, but at a certain point, health problems caught up with both of them, and they decided that it was time to retire from mining since they just weren't up to the physical nature of it anymore. This situation came to the attention of both myself and my partner at the time, Cal Graber, a California mineral dealer, who were both acquainted with Lindsay and had purchased Rogerley specimens from him at various shows over the years. And not having any really good idea what we were getting ourselves into, we decided to approach Lindsay and find out if we could take over the mining project. I'd been traveling to the UK for about 10 years already on a casual basis and had gotten myself fairly comfortable with driving on what is, at least to us foreigners, the wrong side of the road, and thought, okay, no problem, I can get around. Let's go do this. And this is what it looked like when we showed up. That ladder is definitely not HSE approved. Um, and the mine was in need of serious rehabilitation as it had sat vacant for a couple years by that point, and had fallen prey to various weekend visitors, high graders, as we call them here in the US. Um, so after negotiating the leases with the landowner and the Church of England, who owned the mineral rights, and of course require their pound of flesh for whatever you take out of their properties. Um, we had at it. And after about 6 weeks of rebuilding the ladders and reinforcing the tunnels at the portal at the beginning of the adit, we got down to some serious mining. Next slide, please. Okay, this is sort of what it looked like after we had rebuilt the ladder and reinforced and reestablished the portal there and got some equipment back up there onto the platform. And um, I think this is a picture of Joan wandering around looking at what all of her hard-earned money was going into. Next. Okay, and over the course of our tenure there from 1999 to 2016, we managed to drive a considerable amount of tunnel. And in the lower right there, you can see kind of a rabbit warren of tunnels and such. What happened initially was that the first section of tunnel there, just north of the portal, was where Lindsay and Mick did their work, and that was starting to collapse in a couple of areas. So instead of trying to worry about that, we drove a loop to the east to type more or less bypass that area for the purposes of getting our equipment in and out and concentrate on it on working first the black sheep pocket in the first couple of years, then across the vein, the west crosscut pocket zone for a good number of years while we drove tunnel northward on the vein, searching for new sections of flats that produced mineral specimens. Finally, ending up in 2015-16 at the northern end of our workings, which probably at that point totaled close to 1,000 meters. Um, Not 1,000 meters, 1,000 feet, um, with the Bluebird's pocket zone. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, the almost initially, once we started, we decided, okay, it's time to start digging, see what we can find. I noticed a small alcove to the east of Lindsay and Mick's old tunnels that had a few bits of green in the stuck into the mud. And one of the, believe it or not, one of the most important tools in our entire mining procedure there, maybe aside from drills and dynamite and stuff like that, was water. Because all of the flats are filled with the sticky, tenacious mud that in order to see what you've got, you have to be able to wash the stuff out. And fortunately, there was access to a water main right in the um, floor of the old quarry. So it was very easy to tap into that and bring uh, water plumbed up into the mine. And so immediately started washing down the faces, looking to see what we found. And this is a series of photos taken over the course of about 2 or 3 days in June of 1999, documenting the opening of what became known as the Black Sheep Pocket. Um, First photo there with the water gun, you can see the mud just washing out of the what turned out to be the pocket zone. The initial openings with nicely crystallized mineral specimens just hanging from the roof of the cavity. It develops, gets wider, and within a couple of days, there was our head miner Byron crawling on his back in there to try and pull things out of there. Um, this black sheep pocket zone continued to produce for us in one form or another until probably 2003 or so. And the flood of specimens that came out of this quickly made us realize that we had something more than just a casual summer collecting trip on our hands here and had to fall back and formulate what we were going to do with all this stuff now. How were we going to get it back to the US? How we were going to process it? How we were going to market it? How we were going to pay for doing all of this? But, you learn as you go. Next slide, please. Um, Another important thing that they're probably taken for granted now with in the business of specimen mining, but back in 1999, the diamond chainsaw was a very new item. It was, to my recollection, first introduced by Brian Lee's and company at the Sweet Home mine in Colorado, which produced all those wonderful reddish peak rhodochrosite specimens. Um, so we decided to invest in one of these things as well, and it proved very beneficial to our operation as well, particularly in this case of the black sheep pocket, because the matrix was very highly silicified there, and an awful lot of the material just had to be cut out in place. Here you see Byron working underground with the saw and then out on the landing, trimming up some of the pieces we got out afterwards. Next, there we go. Um, Again, a photograph of him bellying into the pocket zone and then holding one of the first large plates of fluorite that we managed to cut out of the pocket zone. Next, just some specimen photos. Some of the things typical of the black sheep pocket, minor amounts of galena intermixed with it, some of the specimens with sort of a finely crystalline quartz matrix and stalactite type growth features were fairly common in this pocket zone. Next, um, an extension to the east of the black sheep pocket, which we encountered when we were driving that loop tunnel to the east side, um, got called alternately the birthday pocket because it was discovered on Cal's wife's birthday, or the dipper zone because it tended to dip into the floor, and we would end up having to dig down and create pockets that immediately filled up with water, and you had to somehow drain them to continue collecting. But again, typical Rogerley fluorite, some big plates in situ, and then nicely twinned green crystals on matrix as a result. Next. Um, Near the head of Mick and Lindsay's old tunnel was a small cavity that we discovered while we were driving the loop tunnel, trying to reconnect with the north end of Mick and Lindsay's original tunnel. And this was called the Solstice Pocket because we broke into it on June 21st in 2001. And it wasn't particularly big, but it produced an awful lot of nice uh, sprays of small, gemmy, lustrous crystals, very little in the way of cloudiness or corrosion on the part of the crystals. And it was just fun to collect because you'd pull one out, then you'd pull another out, and pretty soon uh, the day was gone. Next slide. Okay, across from the Black Sheep pocket on the west side of Mick and Lindsay's tunnel, we decided in late early 2001 to drive a cross cut to see if there was anything on the other side of the vein, and lo and behold, yes, there was. And this turned into an area that we called the West Crosscut for obvious reasons, which was sort of a series of interconnected pockets or cavity zones that all had sort of an individual characteristic to them. But this zone was remarkably long-lived. It produced for 9 years for us and is what funded the mine until we reached the later jewel box and bluebell pockets about 2009, about that time. There was a long stretch of barren tunnel that we were able to continue driving just based on the fact that we were getting saleable material out of the West Crosscut. And here you can see Cal to the left, Byron to the right, and one of the first pieces to come out of this zone, sitting outside on the landing on top of a piece of equipment. Next, some typical specimens from the main of the West Crosscut, which we worked for the first few years there. Again, nicely twinned green fluorite clusters on matrix, nice twinning, vicinal faces, etc. Eminently saleable material. Next, um, branching a little to the north from the main zone, we got into another area which I initially called the dodgy bugger pocket for the very reason that in the photo on the lower left there, you can see a large rock, the top center, that's covered with fluorite hanging in the ceiling of the cavity. This rock was loose. It wiggled back and forth. It probably weighed several hundred pounds if it ever came loose. But we couldn't get it loose. It just wiggled back and forth. And so Byron, being the brave soul that he is, well, I'm just going to keep digging. And so he did. And it turned into a nice little pocket-like cavity, a crawl space, and produced some very nice fluorite. In this case, they started to come out associated with some very nice white quartz-rich matrix, which, if you were lucky, didn't just disintegrate when the specimen dried out. Next, there we go. Some fluorite from it. Again, you can see nice white quartzy matrix, some galenas. The one on the right is a tall stalactite-like form. It's 360. If you wanted to put it on one of those little rotating stands, it would just go around for you and you could see it from all different angles. But since I'm the one that took all of the photos, that's the side that I like the best. So that's what you get to see here. And another nice crystal there, just on quartz with galena, nice twin, nice and lustrous. Next, continuing through the dodgy bugger, it opened up into a larger zone, still a crawl space, really. It was a tube-like structure. Only one person could really get in there to work at a time, and so I remember spending a good number of days with Byron up there at the face of the thing, passing these things back over his shoulder, where I take them and wrap them in newspaper and haul them out onto the platform, and then we'd wash them up and see what we'd actually gotten for all of our efforts. And this one continued well through the summer of 2007 and into the spring of 2008. And on the left, we have a young budding mineral collector from a friend's daughter from here in Tucson with her first find. She was about 12, 13 years old at the time, perfect size to fit up to the face of the cavity. So we dressed her up and said, go have at it, see what you can find. And that's her holding one of her prizes. Next slide. Some specimens typical from the rat hole. The other thing that was interesting about this is that, unlike the rest of the mine, twinned fluorite was actually fairly rare. Most of these crystals were untwinned clusters, and they tended to occur on nice, well crystallized quartz matrix, which yielded some pretty attractive pieces. Next. About the time we thought that thing was worked out, it opened up again on us. And this one, they decided to call it the rat tail pocket because it was the tail of the rat hole, I guess, something like that. It continued on for us. It wasn't as productive as the rat hole zone, but the quality was very good. The crystals tended to be even more lustrous. And of course, the working conditions were every bit as tight and cramped. And that continued through the summer of 2009 into May of 2010, when one morning I crawled up in there and saw daylight coming around boulders at the head of the pocket zone and some tree roots intruding, and thought, no, I think it's time we back out of this place and fill it in so it doesn't come down on top of us. But it was very nice, productive zone. Wonderful working conditions. You had to lie on your side in a puddle of mud and water and um, just reach up there and get what you could. Next slide. And some of the specimens out of that zone. As I mentioned, all untwinned, um, fairly lustrous, just attractive pieces. The one on the left there, I recall collecting more or less by feel because it was around the backside of a small column that we didn't really want to break out because it was holding some roofs in the rock in place. So I was just lying on my side, reaching around and feeling in the mud to see what I could find, and pulled out a few things, and that's what I got after I washed them off. So some days the mind's good to you. Next. And while all this was going on, we were driving tunnel to the north, and after about 200 feet or so, we encountered another section of flats late in the summer of 2007. In fact, this was when we were getting ready to pack up, ship our stuff home at the end of the summer, and start processing it to make our money at the Tucson show in the coming February. Um, the material from this pocket was from the get-go amazingly better than anything we'd ever found before. And in fact, we decided to make a trip back there for a week in November during the American Thanksgiving week holiday, just to try and extract some of this material and get it back in time for the upcoming Tucson show. And this is a photograph of some of the initial flats and one of the discovery pieces that got everybody all hot and bothered. Next. And this is a photograph of what happened that November when we were there, a selection of specimens sitting on the mine landing, and Byron holding one of the nicer pieces. Um, Byron wasn't known for smiling at the best of times, but we were standing out there in a quarry that had already frozen over. And I was demanding that he pose with these mineral specimens. And I can imagine him thinking, will you just get over it? I want to go to the pub. Um, but hey, history in the making. You got to hold still for it. Next, some specimens from the jewel box. Very nice, deeply colored twinned crystals. The ones at the top, the one at the top of the specimen there on the right-hand side is probably about 3.5, 4 centimeters on an edge, which was larger than anything we had found in any quality at the mine up to that date. So this was quite an exciting time. Um, but as all good things happen, it didn't last for too long. Next slide. The zone pinched out fairly quickly, but after a blank space of, oh, I don't know, 5, 10 feet, it opened up again into what was named the Bluebell Pocket. the Bluebell, of course, being our after hours retreat up the Dale in St. John's Chapel, where after going through the mud removal process, we'd retire for a pint. And this is just a selection of mineral specimens that came out on what I call a good day at the mine. And again, Byron just working away. And of course, it was a nice working there because you could actually sit up in the pocket rather than having to lie on your side the whole time to extract the material. So we thought we were in heaven. Next. All right, one of the nicer specimens to ever come out of that zone, um, which was in July of 2009. Um, this one, I don't know where it is now. We both looked at that and thought, that's really nice, but that's going to pay for a lot of mining. So it got sold on. And where it is today, I'm not sure, but I hope whoever's got it can appreciate it. Next, some more specimens from the zone there. I think Mr. Jones will recognize the one on the right there, um, and another one to the left that I featured in a lot of our adverts at the time. Next. Beyond that, we got into an area that was as frustrating as the Jewel Box and the Bluebell were enjoyable. I called it the crushed zone because everything there had been kind of rearranged and crushed up by ground movement. And it's probably where a subsequent fault crossed the vein and the flats, and we got a lot of bits and pieces out of there, but very little in the way of, excuse me, very little in the way of really decent mineral specimens. We had some gem cutters as customers at the time who were very pleased with the produce at that from that, but it didn't make us a whole lot of money. Lower right is one of the nicer specimens that I hung on to out of that zone. It's just a miniature about 3.5 centimeters across, but very, very gemmy. Next. Following on beyond that, we got into another section of flats, which were on the west side of the vein, and which trended up into the ceiling of the level where we were working at. And this had probably had to do with displacement along the fault that we had just driven our way through with the crust zone. Um, this zone, we jokingly referred to it as the one specimen a day pocket zone because everything came out on these big plates that took, oh, the better part of a day to extract sometimes. Um, Cal and Ian there working at trying to get something out of the roof of the zone. What you can't see below them is they're working standing on a ladder, which was always fun when you're trying to swing a hammer and tends to lever you back off of the ladder and onto the ground below. The pocket zone was named after a friend of ours, Penny Williamson from Australia, who happened to be visiting at the time. So she had the honor of having a pocket named after her. Next, some specimens from the Penny's pocket zone. Big ones, not quite of the quality we were getting out of the Bluebell zone, but eminently saleable material, and it certainly kept us um, paying the bills for another few years while we were following that one. Next, one of the more memorable occurrences there in Penny's pocket zone was what Joan ended up calling the Weardale Giant, which is a large rock that Ian and I discovered in the roof of the pocket zone, and you can see the upper left photograph. It was originally completely encased in mud, and you just saw a little seam of fluorite on one edge, and we thought, okay, we'll just wash a little bit of this off and pry out some plates, and that'll be that. But it kept going and going and going, and after about a week, we had exposed this rock that was maybe a couple meters across, and it just kept going. And so we were wondering, what do we do about this thing? We can't pick it up and carry it out. So with the help of our local miner, Dave Beetle, we constructed a platform underneath it, and then barred the thing loose onto a padded pallet that we then were able to slide down out of the pocket onto our battery locomotive and drive it out of the mine. And here you have a photo of the crew gathering around their find once we got that out of the mine after about a week and a half's worth of work. Um, at the time, it felt like quite the accomplishment, but on reflection, I think we all decided that if we ever discovered another one, we'd probably drill a hole in it and use a small amount of explosive to break it up rather than going through that experience again of hauling the thing out whole. But it made for a good photo op, and somebody did end up buying it from us. So it actually paid off. Next. The end of the zone, as I mentioned, it ended up going up into the roof of the level we were working at. And this is some photos of working the pocket zone right before it appeared to vanish on us. And we were doing this from scaffolding right in the middle of the tunnel, which, of course, given the size of the specimens coming out of this zone, made for a lot of fun because you were trying to pull out these very large plates over your head, and not drop them and not knock yourself off of the scaffolding at the same time. Um, Photograph of Ian trying to do just that on the upper right, and some of the specimens in various states of uncovering there. Next. About that time, we decided to drive another crosscut, this time to the east of the Penny's Pocket Zone, and see what we could turn up there. And fortunately, after about 10, 15 feet of tunnel, we discovered another section of flats, which I initially called the Northeast Crosscut. Um, it At the end of the crosscut, it turned heading north again, and we were back into the same sort of situation we had with the rat hole, where we were digging a long, narrow tunnel where you had to crawl in and work one person at a time to get specimens out of there. Next photo. And here again, we have Ian enjoying a mud bath, uh, going for specimens, which were relatively plentiful off of it was a more narrow seam than what we had before, but the specimens were nice, gemmy, lustrous, um, and a couple of pieces that as they came out of the mine there, a particularly large one there in the upper right that Cal's displaying, then a slightly smaller one with the ever-present 2p coin scale there. Gives you some idea of the size of these things. Next. Oh, and we did get to name, we gave Ian the choice of the option of naming that pocket zone, and he went for Bluebirds, which is the informal name of the Cardiff football team, because that year they had actually been elevated to the Premier League, which ended up being fairly short-lived, but he was fairly chuffed about it. But then just to keep us all humble, at that point, our MCO, which is the pneumatic shovel loader, decided that it was time for the gearbox in the thing to collapse. And so we had to figure out what to do about it. It took us about 6 weeks to open the thing up, figure out that all the bearings in the gearbox had collapsed, go find new ones, put it back together again, and get it working. So that was a major diversion from our collecting time that summer. But for whatever it's worth, I can now put on my resume that I have in fact rebuilt the gearbox on a 50-year-old MCO 12B for whatever that's worth these days. Next slide, please. About the time we got the MCO back running, we decided we would angle the tunnel to the east and intersect the zone we had been digging in so we didn't have to crawl up this narrow little crawl hole that we dug. And as soon as we intersected the zone, we discovered that it was pinching out. We probably got a day or two's worth of collecting before we were looking at mud and barren limestone again. So we turned north and followed the strike of the vein. And after about 15, 20 feet or so, the pocket zone appeared again. So we just called it Bluebird Zone number two. And that one kept us busy for another couple of years following that along. And the output was very similar to the first zone. They were all nice, not horribly big plates, lustrous, well-formed crystals. Um, and the nice thing about this zone is that we could do a lot of the work standing up because it was in the wall of the tunnel. Next. A few specimens from the number two zone here. Again, just nice, deeply green, well-trimmed, lustrous fluorite crystals. Um, a bit more galena in this zone than we'd previously found. Um, but that kept us busy for another 2 years. Next photo, next slide. There we go. And after that point, life, for a number of reasons entailing local bureaucracies such as the HSE and the fact that we lost access to our explosives store, which we were doing at the Heights quarry. The fellow there who was kind enough to let us store our explosives in their magazine over all of the years decided it was time to move on. So he left. His replacement wasn't so keen on the idea, so we lost access to our explosives store. About the time the HSE promulgated a whole bunch of new regulations for the mines inspectorate, we had a new crew of inspectors who were eager to prove they knew what they were doing and came in and started mandating things that would have cost us a great deal of money to comply with were we to continue. And after looking at the situation, realizing we would have to pay for putting in our own explosives, licensed explosives store, we would have to do an awful lot of mandated upgrades from the mines inspectorate, and it just said, no way are we ever going to pay for this with what we're getting out of the mine. So the decision was made to offer it on to Mr. Bruce, who has taken that ball and run with it ever since. But as an adjunct to the production of green fluorite out of the veins in the Rogerley, you need to mention the fact that occasionally along the way we'd run into what I called vein pockets, which were cavities in the mineralized vein itself. These ones were quite different than what you got out of the flats. They were very solid and difficult to work, whereas the flats you could do most of your collecting just with water and screwdrivers and a pry bar. Um, and the fluorite was also, for the most part, purple, large, untwinned crystals. They weren't nearly, they didn't command nearly the price that the green stuff out of the flats did. So we never spent a lot of time collecting, trying to collect these things when we found them. But occasionally, we did come across one that was easy to collect and gave us some good material. The most notable was one that was just called the Purple Pocket, and that was in the summer of 2010. And that large plate there shown in somebody's hands, I actually still have that one. If anybody's interested in a specimen that weighs, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 kilograms, something like that, it could be yours. Just let me know. Next slide. Okay, the cast of characters from this whole little production here. Upper left, you have Cal Graber, Ian Jones, and myself. Upper right, Lindsay Greenbank and Mick Sutcliffe, the originators and first owners of the mine. Um, Lower left, we have Dave Beadle, our local miner, who was invaluable in the operation of this project because he was the one that actually knew how to mine. We could collect and market specimens, but he was the one that made sure the mine we could drive tunnel without it all falling down on top of us. He came out of the commercial mines there. He'd been at Camberkeels, Redburn, and finally Grove Rake Fraser's Hush before it shut down. And we were just fortunate enough to show up in the Dale about the time he was out of work. And so we're able to hire him on for the summers to help us out. And then last but not least was Tim Sherborne, Southern California collector friend of ours who, while not a miner and not involved in the operation of the mine, helped immeasurably with cleaning and processing the material, and he was the one that managed our sales room every February at the Tucson show for us. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of these people are no longer with us, but they contributed greatly to the success of what we did there. Next. And with that, we will ride off into the sunset. A nice Weardale sunset from out in front of the pub there, Bluebell in St. John's Chapel one evening. Um, Summer in the North Pennines. Of course, this is probably about 11 o'clock at night. You've had a pint or two, you decide you better go back and get some sleep before you go down the mine again. And that's what you'd see once in a while. Um, so the next part of the story you'll have to talk to Ian Bruce and company about because they've taken that ball and run with it and had a great deal of success, particularly with working from the cross vein side in the Western Quarry. Um, and so the saga continues, but it's not my story anymore. So thanks for paying attention.